Good day, class. Before we proceed to our discussion for today, let me present to you the objectives of this lesson. First, you have to understand the passage and grasp its meaning. Next, you have to express the ideas of the passage orally and in writing. It has to develop your imagination, and you have to read with correct pronunciation, stress, intonation, pause, and articulation of voice. So here's the story that we are going to talk about today. Based from its title, what do you think is the story all about? It is entitled The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. So based on the title, what do you think is the content of the story? Is it all about an hour? What do you mean by that? Next, what does the cover tells you? You see there's a woman staring outside the window, so what do you mean by that? Does it have a significant symbol? So now I'm going to read to you the passage. You have to listen carefully because after this you're going to read it silently. So you have to take note of my intonation, my pronunciation, and stress, so that you can follow me and do it properly. In that way, you can understand the passage. So here's the story of an hour by Kate Chopin, written in 1894. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her, as gently as possible, the news of her husband's death. It was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brantley Mallard's name leading to the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself to its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once with sudden, wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aquiver with the new spring life. The delicious breeze of rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly, and countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other in the west facing her window. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. She was young, with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name. But she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped from her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under the breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss this suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and gray and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely, and she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. There would be no one to live for during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. And yet she had loved him sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? Free! Body and soul free! She kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Lois, open the door, I beg. Open the door, you will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Lois? For heaven's sake, open the door. Go away, I am not making myself ill. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her, spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Bradley Mallard who entered, a little travel-stained, composedly carrying his gripsack and umbrella. He had been far from the scene of the accident, and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of the joy that kills. So that's it. That's the whole story. I hope you understand. But if not, you should try to understand because you are going to read it silently so that you will be immersed on the story. Before you start reading, here's some of the unfamiliar words that you have to know and understand. First, we have afflicted, which means previously affected, especially by disease. So you have to take note of these words. Next, we have hasten, which means to act or move at high speed. Forestall, deal with ahead of time. Peddler, someone who travels about selling wares. Ware, commodities offered for sale. Repression, a state of forcible subjugation. Suspension, temporary cessation. Elusive, difficult to detect or grasp by the mind to analyze. Strive, attempt by employing effort. Tumultuous, characterized by unrest or disorder or insubordination. Keen, intense or sharp. Exalted, or high moral or intellectual value. Trivial, a little substance or significance. Procession, the act of moving forward as toward a goal. Persistence, continuing or repeating behavior. Impose, inflict something unpleasant. Assertion, the act of affirming or stating something. Impulse, an instinctive motive. Elixir, a substance believed to cure all ills. Fancy, imagination, especially of a casual or whimsical kind. Importunity, insistent solicitation and entreaty. Unwitting, not aware or knowing. Composedly, in a self-collected or self-possessed manner. Pierce, which means sound sharply and shrilly. Now you have to read it by yourself and analyze the story so that you can have answers to my questions after this. Now get one whole sheet of paper and answer the following questions. We have number 1. What is the significance of Mrs. Millard's heart trouble? Number 2. What is the significance of freedom in the story? How does the author portray this idea? Number 3. Describe Mrs. Millard's reaction to the death of her husband. Why do you think she feels this way? Number 4. What does Richards represent in the story? Number 5. What does Josephine represent in the story? Number 6. What view of marriage is portrayed in the story? Can this view apply today? Number 7. Describe Mrs. Millard's journey in the story. You have 30 minutes to answer the following questions. Now we will have our oral recitation. Are you ready? This question is very simple if you understand the passage. So what is the moral lesson of the story? Anyone? Yes? Very good. Next. Great! Next, another hand please. Perfect. Next question. Oh, that was the only question. So next, you have to write a reflection paper about the story. We have to organize your reflection paper from the introduction, body, and conclusion. For your assignment, use the following words in a sentence. So I know that you are already familiar with these words because we have already discussed this. We have afflicted. Please repeat after me. Afflicted. Hasten. Forestall. Procession. Assertion. Peddler. Wear. Repression. Impose. Elixir. Suspension. Elusive. Strive. Persistence. Implore. Tumultuous. Keen. Exalted. Trivial. Impulse. Fancy. Importunity. Unwitting. Composedly. Pierce. Very well. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.